you've got an exceptional background. You are a meteorologist and climate change journalist, and you've been forecasting and reporting on the most extreme weather across North America for 14 years. Would you describe yourself as a storm hunter? Because it seems you like being in the eye of the storm.
I'd be lying if I said there isn't an adrenaline rush that goes with storm chasing. So yes, I've been doing this a very long time. Reno. It's the biggest, and the interesting part about that is we didn't know it was the biggest at the time. We knew nothing about what was going on it was 2013. It was our last chase day. We had been in Tornado Alley for about 3 weeks. So we were tired, we had been driving along, and what scientists are finding is that the wildfire season is often getting longer. It's beginning earlier and ending later. Of course, we saw the Los Angeles fires this year. There's been some setbacks, with the recent administration in the United States, obviously, and all the slashes to climate change and weather jobs. When we think about climate change, you always hear the people say, oh, well, it snowed today, so much for climate change, or it's cold. Forget global warming. It doesn't work like that. That's the biggest shift among society, is that it used to be, at least for us folks in North America, it used to be that climate change events were happening somewhere else. It was like all those monsoon patterns in India and the flooding, if that was happening somewhere else. It's not my backyard. Well, now it is in our backyard. It's in everyone's backyard.
Jaclyn, I'm very excited to have you on the Shades of Life podcast, and welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you've got an exceptional background. You are a meteorologist and climate change journalist, and you've been forecasting and reporting on the most extreme weather across North America for 14 years. Notably, you have stood in front of the world's largest ever recorded tornado in El Reno, Oklahoma. You've been in the center of 9 hurricanes and reported on countless blizzards, wildfires, and floods across the US and Canada. So first question, with this background, would you describe yourself as a storm hunter? Because it seems you like being in the eye of the storm.
Yeah, Ingrid, I really do. I mean, I'd be lying if I said there isn't an adrenaline rush that goes with storm chasing. So yes, I've been doing this a very long time, but I was kind of thrown into it. It was something that sort of came out of nowhere. And a friend of mine, 14, 15 years ago now, said, hey, would you like to go to Kansas and do some storm chasing? And it was my first job in the weather business, working for a local station here in Canada, in Saskatchewan. And I had never thought about storm chasing. And even though I kind of grew up as a kid in an area where we got a lot of severe weather, and my dad and I would often be watching storms from the garage, with the garage door open. So I guess I started early without even knowing it was really storm chasing. But anyway, I got asked to do this, and I took advantage of that really unique opportunity. And from that year on, which was 2011, I've been covering active weather of all kinds since. And so, yes, I would call myself a storm hunter, a storm chaser, whatever you'd like. We used to, a colleague of mine, Mark Robinson, who's a storm chaser at the Weather Network where I work in Canada, we used to host a show called Storm Hunters, which is available on Amazon Prime. And so, yeah, I mean, this was what we did. So aside from shooting a television show and covering all these really interesting events, there was a lot of hard news reporting to do there too. There was a lot of devastation that always came with this. And so, there's that adrenaline rush, there's the excitement, there's the invigoration, but then there's also the emotional side of it. And when we're in destruction and that sort of thing. So it's kind of an interesting juxtaposition to be in when you're out there.
Yeah, that's so interesting to know how it all started, because I was wondering, because extreme weather events is not how you started your career, as I discovered, as you've been a professional entertainer, singing and dancing on stage for hundreds of packed theaters and venues all over the world. And you did this for, I think, 11 years. prior
Good.
to moving to the media world. So that was a completely different career. So how does someone transition from musical theaters to meteorology and storms? Obviously, your friends initiated you to storm chasing, but that's quite a big change of career, isn't it?
It is. And a lot of people are like, how did you go to meteorology from music? Well, it was a big shift. And I think that being on stage as a performer from really a young age, since the age of, I don't know, maybe 8, 9, 10 years old, playing in piano recitals and that sort of thing, I've always been in front of an audience. And so whether I was on stage singing and dancing and performing, or whether I was in front of the camera, there is a similarity there. There's always an audience that you're talking to. So I figured when I was about 30 or so, a while ago now, that that would be a good natural next step for my career. But yes, I did tour and perform, oh, countless shows, hundreds and hundreds of shows for 11 years, which was a highlight of my career, you know. And then, yes, I moved into meteorology. I moved into media really at first, and I didn't even really know I'd end up in weather. And then I started to explore once again those younger days with my dad watching thunderstorms in the garage near Detroit, Michigan, in Windsor, Ontario, Canada. And I thought this is kind of cool. This is something I could really sink my teeth in to weather, you know. And so one thing led to another. I went back to school for meteorology for 3 years, obtained an operational meteorology certificate with Mississippi State University in the States. And the rest is history. And then I started working as an on-air weather anchor, and then meteorologist, and then the storm chasing happened relatively quickly in my career, and here I am 15 years later or so.
Yeah, yeah, and that defines
And I
very
still
much.
wish to sing. I still do like to sing. I did a jazz gig in Toronto in 2019. That was the last time I was on stage, but it's still very much a passion of mine. And so, once a performer, always a performer.
Yeah. Actually, I saw a post from you recently, and I think you were promoting your husband, and he's a musician, right?
Oh yeah, my husband actually runs a music publishing company here in Canada, and he's a composer and producer for 35 years in Canada. And so yes, he runs a wonderful company called Hard Music Design. But it's actually how my husband and I met. We recorded 2 albums together years ago. We met 24 years ago. So we have started as musicians and in the music space, and then I moved into, the nerdy
Yeah.
meteorology side of my career. And really, I heard a saying one time from a very dear friend that there's 3 careers in everyone. There's 3 good careers. Well, this has definitely been career number 2. And I am amid a transition right now into what I call career number 3. And that is really centered around climate change communication and sustainability communication, which is also very much a passion of mine. And so I'm, yeah, kind of merging into that world, and it may take a long time, but it's something that I really enjoy doing and feel that there's a major need for.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I was interested in inviting you and welcome to my world then. And that feels like
Thank
a
you.
very logical transition for you as well.
Yeah,
Because there is such a big link with climate change. So I was actually reflecting on how your experience as an entertainer relates to what you do today. And I was actually wondering if perhaps there is an element of going to another stage, another performance, but this time by Mother Nature, because storms, as we know, it's like a spectacle in itself. And perhaps there is also an element of touring part of the world because you need to be where the action is. So, what parallels exist there? So, obviously, you talked about being in front of a camera.
sure. Well, there's certainly some parallels there when you say it like that. I mean, I think the biggest shift is that when I'm on stage or when I'm in front of the camera, I'm sort of in control, right? I can entertain the audience, whatever that means. When I'm out in the field storm chasing, Mother Nature is the performer, and I become that audience. At the end of the day, I have very little control on what goes on out there, and none of us do. And that could be, tornadoes, hurricanes. You're kind of at the mercy of the storm. So it's a different kind of position that way. And it's, Mother Nature is really on the grandest stage there is, to see a thunderstorm out in the Canadian prairies or the plains of the United States where it's just flat for, you know, literally hundreds and hundreds of kilometers in front of you, and then to see a beautiful structured thunderstorm over a yellow canola field, and the sunset and the heavy dark rain clouds and lightning and maybe a tornado. It's absolutely beautiful. I mean, what a show, right? So there is a link there. You're right. I've toured a lot around the world for active weather, much like I toured around the world as a performer. A lot of the time when I'm going somewhere, at the worst of the times. It's like I'm getting on a plane when everybody is evacuating in many cases, and I'm I'm going into a storm. Um, and there has to be a balance there too, because like I said, there's this excitement or adrenaline rush and all these things, and it's part of my job to cover this journalistically speaking. But there has to be a respect for locals when we come into a scene like that. It's about being there where you're not in the way. It's about telling that story to the best of your ability. It's about helping to warn people ahead of a storm, maybe a hurricane making landfall. And lately for me, my entire motive is to tell that climate change connection part of the story, if there is one, because not every weather event, as we know, can be linked to climate change. But many hurricanes, heat events, flooding events that I've covered, wildfires, are attributed to climate change. So my main mission when going into these very highly sensitive situations is to try and honor that community by telling that story the best I can.
Well, you're a great storyteller. You really bring things to life for us. So, you know that I'm from Europe, so I'm not very familiar with these big storm events that you're describing. Where would you say the biggest storms and most extreme weather events take place or have taken place in the past 15 years when you've covered these events in North America? And would you say there are repeated patterns year after year in some of these places?
The tornado capital of the world is the United States. That's where we see the
Yeah.
most tornadoes. So if we just stick with that, there's a reason for that. We have Canada to the north, so we have cold Arctic air that's coming from Canada. We've got the desert southwest of the United States, so Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, all those states are very dry. So we have dry air masses colliding with cold Canadian air masses. And then we have the Gulf of Mexico and the tropics. So we have humidity and lots of moisture that wants to battle it out with the dry and the cold. So right where all those air masses battle it out are states like Tornado Alley. So Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, Missouri, and a few others. And so that is the tornado capital of the entire world. And that's where I've spent a majority of my career, probably, storm chasing weeks on end. So that's nothing new. Those have always happened. And to be honest, we actually can't link climate change to tornadic events. We don't have enough data to support that. The science is just not there quite yet. Now, there have been signs and some research that have suggested that some of the tornadoes are shifting a little bit further eastward into the upper Midwest of the United States, but there's really no direct link with tornadoes. So that's where the capital is, if you will, of tornadic storms, which I'm sure in Europe, yes, would be quite fascinating. I have some storm chaser friends that come from England and chase in Tornado Alley. The other thing that happens a lot in North America, which does help happen around the world, are hurricanes. And hurricanes often happen, in the southeast United States, so up and down the eastern seaboard, so from Florida all the way up to, New York. Then you have the Gulf of Mexico states, which is, Texas, Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi. Those areas are very prone to hurricanes. Now, there's been hurricanes or tropical systems all around the world and have from the beginning of time. We call them different things, cyclones, typhoons, different parts of the world. All of those storms are feeling the effects of climate change as we see warmer ocean waters worldwide. And certain ocean currents and certain ocean basins have more warm water available due to climate change. So the Gulf of Mexico, I think, as you've seen in some of my reporting just this last hurricane season, is a very volatile area in the United States. So yes, they've always had hurricanes, but the frequency of these hurricanes and the intensity of these hurricanes, is increasing due to climate change. So that's kind of the capital in the United States of where the hurricanes happen. Winter weather, wildfires, all these other things too go on all over North America. They're maybe not quite as exciting as a hurricane or a tornado, but wildfires are something that I deal with in my own backyard in British Columbia, Canada, every summer season. And what we're finding is, scientists are finding, is that the wildfire season is often getting longer. It's beginning earlier and ending later. Of course, we saw the Los Angeles fires this year and how devastating that was. There is a direct link to climate change around wildfire activity, in terms of drought and available fuels and all of this. So it's scary to think about where we are down the way if we don't make changes, particularly around wildfire activity. And that one hits close to home because I've actually been on evacuation alert, and I was waiting for about 4 or 5 weeks in 2021. And I was waiting for the knock at the front door that would say, all right, you have to leave your home. Thank goodness that didn't happen, but I was still on alert, which was very unsettling. And we see too, we've seen smoke into Chicago, New York City a couple summers ago from Canada. These are things that for generations and generations people had not seen. They didn't know what wildfire smoke was like in New York City. So, things are changing. We know that, and we're taking note, and all the more reason to make changes.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm gonna make you laugh, but
Okay.
I made a trip to the Universal Studio in Florida in my 20s, long time ago as well. But this is where they replicated a tornado in Hollywood-style decors, probably very far from the real thing. But I think
Right.
this is when I discovered that, extreme weather events are part of North American culture, just like, if you are from Canada, snow and strong winters are part of your culture, right?
Yeah.
So I just wanted to ask you in general, because we are seeing changing patterns. Do you think people in North America are ready in general for these extreme events? Or, as you were saying, are they becoming more unpredictable and taking people by surprise? Like, I think it was quite the case this year with LA and the wildfires. Despite experiencing wildfires perhaps every year, it was quite unusual at that time of the year, wasn't it?
Was. And how rapidly these fires are spreading, right? Like it's hard to get ahead of them when winds are that strong. And in this case, it's the Santa Ana winds that are coming down the mountains. It's hard to get ahead of that, no matter what kind of technology you have in place, weather sensors, AI sensors, all these different wonderful tools. But at the end of the day, again, we talked about Mother Nature in charge. Sometimes it's difficult to battle those fires when the winds are so strong. And I think that's what we saw in LA. So, to answer that question, yeah, I think people, who have always lived in that area have dealt with fires. It's nothing new. But are we going to see more events or more extreme events like what we saw? Is the Palisades area, was that just kind of a one-off and, just bad timing, bad luck, bad winds, bad everything? Maybe. Or, is it because of drought, lack of water in reservoirs, etc.? Is it more of a policy situation that happened and think that they weren't ready? There's a million different factors, and I certainly wouldn't cast any judgment or that. But what I will say is that people that have been dealing with hurricanes for generations, for many years in their families, are noticing changes. I have interviewed people directly in states like Florida just recently that are saying, okay, I've lived here for however many years, third generation of my family, and I have never seen storms operate like this. What's happening is that we're getting storms in the Gulf of Mexico that are moving over such warm water, and there's nothing stopping these storms. And so they're coming in. I mean, sometimes yes, wind shear and different things can stop the storms, but sometimes there aren't those ingredients in place. So you've got this intensifying, rapidly intensifying hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico, potentially making a landfall in Tampa, and in that case with Milton, that was supposed to move into Tampa and then slid a little bit further south and missed Tampa. Okay, good news for Tampa, but it's just a matter of time when some of these major centers are going to be in the target zone, and so that's daunting because people have lived there for a long, long time, and they're seeing the changes with these storms. And when you're in the path of a Category 5 hurricane, you have no choice but to evacuate, because I've seen it. Everything has been completely wiped off its foundation unless your home is on stilts. There is generally nothing left when you're dealing with a storm surge. That's the piling up of the ocean water around the circulation of a hurricane. It's the most deadly and most destructive part of a hurricane. And you can't win against that. So it's very scary to think about that. So I think people are, yes, they've always dealt with hurricanes, but they're seeing the intensity of these hurricanes change. And we know that there's a direct correlation to climate change. Those ocean waters for many seasons have been warmer than usual. Could that change? Yeah, it could. It's not saying every year is going to be like this. In fact, this year we're looking at, we look at things like La Nina, El Nino. These are teleconnections, large scale weather pattern influencers, if you will. And we're looking at a quieter year, not like a blockbuster hurricane season. So that's good news for locals. But it's always important to remember that it only takes one. You can have a quieter year, but all it takes is one major hurricane to do major damage. So yeah, I think people are, it's not that they're caught off guard. It's not that, I think they're surprised. I think that they're surprised at these changes, people that have ridden out storms for years, or their grandparents, or this, they can name them all, but they're saying something's different, something's changed.
Yeah, it's almost like the uncertainty that is difficult to deal with because you don't
Mhm.
know what a year is going to be. Yeah,
And I think it causes a ton of anxiety for people
yeah,
going
exactly.
into a season. I mean, I know it causes me anxiety to go into a wildfire
Yeah,
season,
yeah, I can
And I think
imagine.
that's the thing too with climate change linked events, is that these things, nobody gets out unscathed. It doesn't matter what part of the world you're in, you're likely going to be dealing, if you haven't already, with some sort of climate influenced extreme weather event.
For sure, yeah. I do think it's all over the world in one way or another now.
Mhm.
So I wanted to ask you, it's hard to imagine the ferocity of a storm when you have never witnessed one or when it's a rare occurrence where you live. Myself, I'm from France, and the only big storm I can think of, we had one in the 80s. And we didn't have one since, but I remember it was a very destructive one. But obviously in North America it's a bit different. So I wanted to ask you, can you tell us about one of your extreme experiences, perhaps with the El Reno tornado, for example, as you said it's the biggest. What was it like? If you could bring it to life a little bit for us to better understand what it's like.
Yes, El Reno. If you weren't going to suggest that, that would have been the one I would have told that story anyway, because
That's
um,
the biggest.
yeah, it's the biggest, and the interesting part about that is we didn't know it was the biggest at the time. We knew
Oh.
nothing about what was going on at the time. Other than I can paint the picture. It was 2013. It was our last chase day. We had been in Tornado Alley for about 3 weeks. So we were tired. We had been driving a lot. We'd actually gone through a damage path in Moore, Oklahoma, spent about 4 or 5 days covering an EF5 tornado that killed multiple people, destroyed this area, and was really awful to see. And I mean, our hearts were broken. So it was our last chase day, and quite honestly, I think we were just ready to go home, drive back to Toronto. And it was our last day, and we knew that the parameters, the weather ingredients, if you think of like baking a cake, you need all these different ingredients to come together to make a severe thunderstorm. And we knew all those ingredients were there, and that if things happened, because sometimes they don't as planned, that it could be a very dangerous day. Okay. And it could be a very, I guess, exciting chase day. So there's always that push and pull. And so we sat at a gas station. It's kind of windy. It's muggy. It's humid, very humid, because you've got the Gulf of Mexico air coming in from the south. And it's we're playing cards at a gas station, and we're just waiting, and we're waiting and waiting for the storms to go up, and they weren't going up. And then finally, close to about 5 o'clock, we're just thinking, oh, this is not going to happen. And all of a sudden, we see a little cloud on satellite. We're always looking at our phones or our tablets, and we're looking at weather data, and we see a cloud, just a little tiny little poof of a cloud. Oh, maybe that'll be something that develops. Okay, and then a few minutes later go by. Oh, looks like that cloud's now precipitating. It's producing a little bit of rain. We see that on radar. Maybe that's something to go after. We keep an eye on it. Finally, it looks like it's a thunderstorm. So we get in our cars and we drive, and I can still see it, all the wind turbines that are spinning, and we're driving. We're in a big convoy of cars, and off we go to get this baby thunderstorm. That baby thunderstorm we knew would get bigger, but that baby thunderstorm grew to, oh, I don't know, I'm going to speak feet, sorry, not meters, because I always think of this in feet, but I would say 60 to 70,000 feet in the atmosphere of a storm cloud. So just explosive growth. It it had everything that it was supposed to have: wind rotation, so winds coming into the storm from different angles as you go up in the atmosphere will allow the thunderstorm itself to rotate. And if that rotation starts to tighten up, then you can get a funnel cloud. And if that funnel cloud continues to tighten up, you can get a tornado that touches ground. So we're watching for all those signs. Everything's looking good. Finally, we get a report from a friend of ours that's a couple miles north of us on this highway called Highway 81. And he says, oh, yep, I've got a visual. There's a tornado on this storm. And we're like, woohoo, all right, there's a tornado. So, this is good in our world. So we get the cameras and we're looking out our windows, and this is 12 years ago now, I guess. So anyway, and we're going south, coming down a highway called Highway 81. And I'm looking out my window with my camera. At this time, I had a big camera. And I think that I'm looking at a wall of rain, like just rain, a dark rain cloud. And because my friend that said there was a tornado on it didn't really say it was a large tornado, just I thought it was a small tornado. Well, anyway, what we realize as we're driving south among hundreds of other chasers on the same road is that we're actually looking at the edge of the tornado. So it's not a rain cloud. It's not a massive rain cloud. It's a massive tornado. And we don't know really what size this is at this point, but we just know, oh, that is actually the rotation. So often tornadoes are rain wrapped. Rain surrounds them. And so you don't see the tornado inside, but it still just kind of looks like rain. This was not rain wrapped. Well, it was the actual tornado. So it crossed the road north of us on Highway 81 as we were trying to get south and get out of the way of what became a 4.2 kilometer wide tornado. Like, you can't even get your head around that, right? Like 4.2 kilometers wide, 2.6 miles, I think it was. It changed directions several times. It crossed the highway to our north, about a mile or whatever, kilometer and a half away from us. 3 storm chasers lost their lives that day. They got caught up in the tornado, which surprisingly does not happen very often. And they were veteran scientists and chasers. And so it was very sad that day. Also, several of my friends were north on that highway, and I didn't know if they made it out okay. So I'll never forget, as we were trying to escape this massive tornado, and of course we don't know it's 4.2 kilometers wide, but we know it's big. And all I see is this family opening their storm shelter, the door, to get underground. And they go down, and I'm like, uh-oh. And we see brake lights, and we can't get out of the path. And I honestly didn't know what my fate was at that moment. I did not know if that was the moment. And we made it out okay. Our friends radioed to us later. We're all on walkie-talkie radios. kind of thing. And they were fine too. And we just took a deep breath in after that chase day. And I wasn't even sure if I was going to storm chase ever again. It was only my second or third year, but I was out again the following season. And it can be dangerous at times, but that was a rarity. That was an anomaly. So yeah, El Reno.
Wow, absolutely fascinating. And also to understand all the science, because you have a knowledge, an incredible knowledge of it, but it's actually rare. Have you ever been like, because you were talking about the thrill of chasing storms, but is there fear as well attached to
Oh,
it?
very much. Very much. Sometimes you can't have a visual of a storm because it's rain wrapped. So you know there's a tornado there, you know it's close to your vehicle, but you can't really see it. So you're relying on radar. But then sometimes there's data outages and you lose a visual on your phone or whatever it is. So yeah, there's fear. I think one of the scariest moments for me would be when I'm riding out a hurricane. We often, not often, always, we ride out a hurricane in a parking garage. And the reason we do that is because they're a very strong structure, they're solid concrete. We can go on the second, third, fourth level of a parking garage and get above the storm surge, so the ocean water that's coming in. And it sounds kind of crazy, but it's actually a rather safe area to be because we can stand behind these massive concrete pillars and shoot video and document the storm, go live with our networks, be it on our smartphone streaming or whatever it is, or on television. And then at the end of it, be okay to drive out, hopefully, and go and cover the damage, the aftermath of a hurricane. But I've been scared in that parking garage. I've actually covered 10 storms. I've been in the center of 10 hurricanes. And it's very scary when it's just about to mill and the winds. I mean, the strongest winds I've experienced are 252-kilometer-an-hour sustained winds. So gusts beyond that. And I've been knocked right off my feet. I've had glass doors blown right off behind me, in the parking garage. But the reason we're in a parking garage too, though, is there's no debris. There's not a lot of debris flying because we're in an area that there isn't a lot of debris because you're in a parking garage. One time I got caught in a stairwell and I couldn't open the door against the winds, the strength of the winds. And that was a bit scary because I was cut off from my team. And most times, I'm the only woman out there, it's
Yeah,
mostly a guy's game still. There's more women doing this, but especially in
interesting.
hurricanes, there's many times where it's me and like 100 guys that are in a parking garage. And so, yeah, there's been a few moments where I've been alone and I'm like, oh gosh, I want this to end.
Wow, I was thinking next time I'm in my little office with my cup of coffee, I'll think of you. You have such different working conditions. It's amazing.
That's the
Oh my
only
God.
brave thing I do. I don't do anything else nearly as impressive, just that.
Yeah. So you did explain earlier how hurricanes, tornadoes form. I mean, in Europe, I'm thinking in the Middle East as well, with in recent years, flash floods, which is kind of a new phenomenon. I don't know if you've looked into this, but it's like so much rain, like a year of rain falling, pouring in one day, and it takes everybody by surprise. So I really loved when you were describing with this tornado the early signs or the signs that you can look at to understand the phenomenon of what's happening. Do you think that people need to learn to pay more attention to the weather? Is it enough to look at the meteo? Or should we all be learning a little bit about this phenomenon to, if it happens all of a sudden by surprise, like, it has happened certainly in Europe in the past, at least we are a little bit more prepared. I don't know.
I think that my answer to that would be maybe not understanding of the meteorology behind it, but making sure that everyone has a clear understanding of the potential of these flash flooding events, or a wildfire situation. So having an evacuation type of strategy is a good thing. so that in a flash flood, which happens regularly, I mean, look at Spain, and I think there's a certain, if I recall, phenomenon, meteorological phenomenon. I think it's called Dana, which is a certain type of pattern that supports these stalling thunderstorms into Spain. So maybe people are not going to be poring over weather models going, oh, I wonder, how much precipitable water will be falling on my region today. Maybe not that, but maybe they might say, oh, they're calling for heavy rain. Maybe I better take it just a little bit more seriously based on the last few events that we've seen in certain parts of Europe. Maybe I should make sure I do have an evacuation plan, or I have what we call in Canada, I don't know what it would be called there, but like a grab and go box. So it's like a box that has all your essentials, just in case. I mean, when I was on evacuation alert for 5 weeks, I had this grab and go box at my front door with my leashes for my pets and my pet carrier for my cat and my dog, just in case. Was it over prepared? Maybe, but I was prepared, So much like we have a first aid kit in the back of our car, maybe we have to start thinking a little bit more broadly about the changes we're seeing globally, and being prepared in case would be my answer to that.
Okay, yeah, yeah. And I mean, we will see how things evolve, but perhaps this conversation today doesn't feel as relevant as it will be in 5 years or 10 years. We
Well, this
don't
is it.
know.
We don't know. I agree. But I mean, even just the things we just brought up, the wildfires in LA, the I mentioned the flooding in Spain. You could probably recall many different events in Europe that maybe I don't know about, and the list goes on. I mean, this is a global, situation. So, and I think that's the biggest shift too among society, is that it used to be, at least for us folks in North America, it used to be that climate change events were happening somewhere else. It was like, oh, those monsoon, patterns in India and the flooding, and oh, that was happening somewhere else. It's not my backyard. Well, now it is in our backyard. It's in everyone's backyard. And so, the signs are there. The alarm bells have been set off. It is time for us to listen and to adapt and make changes to mitigate this risk. I don't know how much clearer Mother Nature could be.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And we need to listen as well. So I actually wanted to cover wildfires separately with you because, there are certain extreme weather events that happen in certain parts of the world. And you were just saying very rightly, some people are going to feel concerned because obviously it is in their backyard, and perhaps flash flooding they are going to feel disconnected from it because it doesn't happen from them. But wildfires does happen quite globally in many countries across the world. So I think a lot of people will relate to this. As you said, you are from Canada, a tree nation, and tree means inflammable, isn't it? I think you had record-setting wildfires in 2023, but it does happen every year. If I look at the period, I always like to look at this period. Between 2020 and 2025, we've seen various unusual wildfires. I always refer back to the Black Summer in Australia in 2019-2020, knowing they have their winter and summer opposite of us in the Northern Hemisphere. But there has been a lot of unusual fires in the Siberian taiga. And the Russian Federation has the largest forest in the world, so that's good to remember, and it does matter if they burn. The Amazon, we've seen last year as well. Obviously, we talked about LA this year, and then also Japan and South Korea more recently this year had quite unusual wildfires. And they were all characterized by their size, their intensity or frequency, often occurring outside of the traditional fire seasons or in areas not typically prone to such devastation sometimes. So we started to talk about it earlier, but would you say that wildfires are now fueled by climate change, and how so? What elements can you bring to us today around that?
Well, I mean, in my case, year to year, it changes in British Columbia and in Alberta. We get a lot of wildfires there. We get wildfires in northern Ontario and in northern Quebec, those parts of Canada. And every year is different in terms of the rainfall, the current drought situation, which of course can fuel, a worse wildfire season. Drought, they often say drought begets drought. So, it's difficult to get out of those drought patterns. California finally did, but I think they were in a drought for like 9 or 10 years or something straight. And oddly enough, we had a worse fire when they were out of the drought. So, but I think that it's interesting to think about fire activity because we go from, and you would know this, a carbon sink situation where we can capture so much carbon on Earth because of these wonderful trees, to a problem where we're emitting CO2 levels at a terrifying rate. So you mentioned areas like the Amazon and northern Canada and our boreal forests. I mean, this is detrimental to not have these fires happen because they do such a great job at helping to reduce our carbon in the atmosphere. And so you kind of flip it. It's like those boundaries, those planetary boundaries that are crossed, right? Where now instead of helping, it's flipped the other way. So I mean, obviously precipitation patterns, heat is happening here in Canada. We've seen many frequent heat events. In fact, I covered one in British Columbia in 2021 where all-time Canadian heat records were broken. And is it no shock that within weeks we had one of the worst fire seasons on record? So, dry conditions, heat, we know all these things, lack of rainfall. And where I live, it's actually quite dry as a rule. Like I live in an area called the Okanagan Valley in BC. It's in a valley. It's hot. It's dry. We get fires here. That's pretty normal. But it's the amount of fires that we're seeing across Canada. You mentioned 2023. It was the worst season on record in terms of hectares burned in Canada. Just last year, we had one of our most beautiful national parks, Jasper National Park, impacted by wildfires. I mean, this is one of the most beautiful places on Earth. You mentioned the Amazon. Again, I just go back to, I don't know how many more signs that Mother Nature can hold up to say, I'm hurting, we need to do better. So yeah, I think that the seasonal factor and that a lot of fires are happening outside of those seasonal boundaries, like you said, they're beginning earlier, they're ending later, is a thing, especially in Canada and in the United States. And those forests are precious, we need those forests. And so it's heartbreaking to actually think of where we're at in the future. I hope that answered that question.
Yeah, yeah. And when an ancient forest burns, it's not as easy as replanting trees.
No,
Yeah.
no, it takes a long time. And yes, that's a good strategy to plant as many trees as we can. But the amount of trees that can burn in a short period of time is astounding. And it's in an area where no one really lives, so people don't think about it. But that's just is, exasperating the problem, and that the more we burn, the less we're using as a carbon sink, particularly in places like Russia and Canada.
Yeah, absolutely. So, since you started to work as a meteorologist and climate journalist, Jaclyn, so it's been almost 15 years, I wanted to ask you what are the biggest changes, perhaps, that you have witnessed that you think we should be concerned about?
I would, without question, say that hurricanes have changed the most. I'd mentioned that there's really not a lot of evidence to suggest that tornadoes have really changed much or the frequency of them. It's important to remember that I think it was 2008 to 2000 and, I'm going to be iffy here, but 2008 to 2017, or no, it wasn't. It was 2005, I believe, to 2017, something like that. There was a window where there was no major hurricane landfall in the United States for like 11 or 12 years. That's amazing to not have so a major hurricane is a category 3 or higher, and they go up on the Saffir-Simpson scale from category 1 to category 5. So To not have a major hurricane landfall in that span of time is amazing. But since then, we have seen several major hurricanes since 2017 not only make landfall, but also several what we call rapidly intensifying hurricanes. So they're going from a tropical storm to a category 4 or 5 in a matter of 12 to 24 hours over these warm ocean waters, as an example. That's the big change. It's like, it used to be, yes, hurricanes were coming in and you would watch them, and our weather models and data are getting much better, so we can track these earlier. We can have an understanding of where they're going to make landfall. We can better prepare and evacuate people. That's all good stuff. But what we weren't dealing with maybe 15, 20 years ago are this rapid intensification element to our hurricanes. And that's a game changer, because a tropical storm coming in, with less than 100-kilometer-an-hour winds is something that's very manageable. A category 5 hurricane with 250-kilometer-an-hour winds, that's devastation. And, so that's probably the biggest change that I've seen personally, has been the hurricanes and how they operate.
Yeah. And I suppose it's important to look at the period of time big enough, isn't it?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, you can blame climate change on many things, but we do have to remember that we went so many years, I think it was like 11 or 12 years, without even hurricane landfall in the United States.
Mm.
So there'd be many people that would argue, maybe skeptics that say, well, hang on though, we didn't. And it's not that every storm is going to rapidly intensify into a category 5, but many are. And the frequency of that is happening more. So those are the signs that, yeah, it's not a given every season. We may not see even, a major hurricane this year. Nobody ever knows. Every season's different. And a colleague of mine was the one that said, it only takes one storm. And that is true. So we will see. But I think people are preparing differently now. And that might be a good thing, because I think people that I've interviewed have said, like, no question that things are changing. And they're even not comfortable using those yucky words, climate change, because in their world, they might be climate change deniers,
Yeah,
and they're
exactly.
very pro oil and gas. And so they don't want to say that, but they know something's different. So maybe there's just a better word that we can use
Yeah.
that is really kind of saying the same thing, right?
Yeah. Sometimes you need to speak the language of people, whatever it is. And perhaps it's not climate change.
Exactly. And probably you're on the same page if we can just get past those words.
Yeah, exactly. So quite an open question, but I wanted to ask you, what are your extreme weather predictions for the future if we continue on the path we are on? And also, are there risks that perhaps we are unaware of as well?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of this is what we've already talked about, in that, rapidly intensifying hurricanes are not going anywhere as we see a
Okay.
warmer world. We're only going to see that part get worse. So that's almost a given. And even if we make changes now, not to say that it's too late, of course not, but it's going to take a long time before we really see the reverse of many of the effects that we've already caused. So, that's a given. I think changes that people will be really thinking about moving forward are, should I be living on the coast? Can I get insurance on the coast? Because a lot of people are not able to get insurance, or it's so costly to live in areas like Los Angeles. What's that going to look like after the fires that we just saw? What's it going to look like every hurricane season? So changes about where you live, the concept of, and I know we were going to talk about this, but the concept of like climate refugees, the people that are even successful, hardworking Americans and Canadians, for example, that maybe live in a hurricane prone area, might say, oh, I'm done with this. I'm headed to the Great Lakes, where they'll deal with snow and ice storms and wind, but maybe they won't be subjected to tropical weather. The other thing that is almost a given is we are going to see more heat. We're probably going to be seeing more high heating degree days. So, patterns that are locked in for a long period of time. I think that's something that I have learned just speaking to many scientists about this. Not that that's not my area of expertise, but in terms of climatology, when we think about climate change, it's, you always hear the people say, oh, well, it snowed today, so much for climate change, or it's cold. Oh,
Yeah,
forget
yeah,
global warming. It doesn't work like that. The way that climate change impacts weather patterns are extremes. So it's going to be extreme warmth, it's extreme dry patterns, extreme heat that then could cause drought, that then can cause wildfires, etc. Flooding events, 2 and 3 days of epic rainfall, as you mentioned, where you get a year's worth of rainfall because a
yeah.
thunderstorm just parked itself over one town. These are the kinds of things that we are going to see more of if we don't make changes. And I think that people eventually, if they not are already there, will just say, you win, because I think, like I said, things like cost, insurance, people may not be able to afford to live in these places. And that's sad because a lot of the people that are being impacted are the people that are not the wealthy. It's the people around the world that, because of these global weather patterns, are affected by heat, drought, flooding, and they didn't cause a lot of this damage, you know? And I take accountability for that from as a Canadian. The Western world, we've caused a lot of this damage. And yet we're passing off these problems, these catastrophic weather events to other people, vulnerable people around the world.
Yeah, the global north, as we
Right.
say it. Yeah, and there are stories of resilience and there will be stories of resilience. I
Mhm.
think the big challenge is, are we able to tackle the root cause? That's a big question, I think.
Yeah. Hmm.
So, obviously, I loved looking at all these big weather events with you, but I also wanted to talk about what does it mean for people more concretely, because I think we all need to realize what the reality of these weather events are or can be in the future. So I wanted to refer back to an event that most of us will still have in mind because I think it's been barely 6 months ago. And we all have in mind Hurricane Milton that made landfall in Florida in October 2024 last year. And on the news, we've all seen these many people being displaced, big car queues. That was really impressive, as it felt like as if the whole state was being moved somewhere else. I don't know where, but somewhere else. So Florida is well known as the Sunshine State normally, even if we've seen snow there at the beginning of the year. But is it rapidly becoming the monster storms state? From what you've told us today, it looks like it. Um, and I wanted to refer to a video you have created in the aftermath of the hurricane. Because there is something that's really touched me in this video. There was this family who has lived in Florida for 6 generations. But because of the whole situation with these monster storms and the hurricanes increasing in intensity, I remember the dad was saying they just want to leave the state, even if basically their legacy, their heritage is there. And for me, I found it so heartbreaking to see people having to leave their family heritage behind, basically because of the changing climate. So I wanted to ask you, do you remember this family in Florida that you interviewed? And are they representative of a general feeling of we can't cope anymore in this state?
Yeah, I mean, just as you tell that story, it gives me chills because I can remember that day like it was yesterday. It was just last fall. And, Hurricane Milton was one storm, but just 2 weeks before that, they had Hurricane Helene. And Helene devastated this person's home. I mean, it was still standing, but a ton of damage. You know, all their furniture strung all over the lawns, drying things out, major insurance claims. And this is after 2 years ago, after they dealt with another storm. It's like every few years they're back in this situation. Something that would be like a once in a lifetime event for someone else worldwide is happening again and again and again. And yeah, I mean, it broke my heart too. I mean, this is a hardworking American man that has a family and is very proud of where he lives. It's gorgeous, couple boats, and this is what they do. This is the Florida dream. And he's been there, yeah, like you say, 6 generations, and they're thinking of leaving. That's very, very sad to me as well, because it's actually come to that point where you can't trust the weather pattern. You can't trust what hurricane season is going to look like next year. And not to say every year is going to be like that, but you can just hear the uncertainty in his voice when I interviewed him, and it's called Things Are Changing. It's on YouTube. Maybe you can link to it. But it was powerful to me too, because I don't recall a time, and it's happening in Canada too. It's happening all over the world where people are saying like, "Oh, I'm done with this." In my area, it's wildfires. People are saying like, "I don't know if I want to deal with another fire season." To me, I'm not there. I love where I live. I deal with the fires, but maybe Californians are feeling that way. Oh, I don't want to go through that again. Is it going to be things like smoke? I heard a very interesting podcast one time about like 30 years in advance, and it kind of showcased the idea, or like predicted what it might be like living in Vancouver. Well, Vancouver's always had beautiful air quality, right on the ocean, fresh mountain, like mountain air, beautiful. And what will it be like with these catastrophic wildfires just getting worse and worse and worse every year? Will we be able to go outside and enjoy a summer? Will kids have to be indoors? Will you be wearing a mask everywhere you go, much like we did in the pandemic? It's scary to think about that. And I think that the idea of climate refugees, or people just making choices to move somewhere else, is a real concept. The question is where they move. Is that area just as vulnerable to another type of weather phenomenon? Because everywhere is getting some sort of extremes. I don't think there's really any safe place.
Yes, you were talking, it reminds me also, I did a podcast with someone, and they did three really interesting documentaries, and in them there were maps, with predictions of the future. What will the planet look like? Where are the zones where, we will experience big heat waves? Which zones will be more habitable, if there are any, but the thing is, we don't know. Of course, we can make some predictions that are quite accurate, but there are 8 billion, more than 8 billion people now on the planet. There will be more in the future, and we can't all move to, I
No.
don't know. If the safe place is Alaska, let's imagine,
Right,
we can't
right,
all move to Alaska, right? So
right. Yeah.
it's becoming crazy. So you did refer to a term that I wanted to bring up with you today, Jaclyn, because it's something that is being used more and more for people, but also wildlife. I think we should not forget about the other inhabitants of the planet, but it's climate refugees. As climate changes are pushing people to migrate, that's something that we already see. It's already a reality in some places. What comes to mind right now is the Pacific Islands, for example, with rising sea levels. Obviously, this example we've just talked about with Florida, people were migrating for a short period of time and hopefully came back home. But who knows in the future? We don't know. So I just wanted to ask you, in your years or perhaps recent years, is it a phenomenon you've witnessed outside of the recent hurricane in Florida? And do you think we are going to see more and more of it? And yeah, what does it mean for us? What does it mean for people?
Ingrid, I haven't really had anybody use that term specifically with me, but I think it all means the same thing. When, like you say, when people are saying, "Oh, I've just had it. I've had it with hurricane seasons, or I've had it with tornadoes ruining my town. I'm going to move to this state." Or in Canada, "Oh, I'm done with the winters. I'm going to move to somewhere warmer." I think that it is a reality. There's probably more places globally that maybe I'm not aware of where people are having, not just want to, but have no choice but to leave the area. You look at places like Bangladesh and these low-lying areas, or even New Orleans in the United States. I mean, All it
Mm.
is going to take is one other storm for that to be underwater again, like it was with Hurricane Katrina. And, we can have all the mitigation plans in place, but again, Mother Nature is the one that's in charge at the end of the day. So, I mean, I think that we buy time as things don't happen, and then something happens, and then people say, oh, I'm done with this. But I haven't really heard that term a lot. And I think that home is home. You know, it's very difficult for people to think about changing their home. They've grown up with their community, with their family, their friends. And I mean, a lot of people say, why would you live in Kansas, in the heart of Tornado Alley? Because it's home.
Yeah,
Why would you live in the Great Lakes where they get ice storms and wind and blizzards? And
yeah,
well, because it's home, and you get used to that. And I mean, there's so many deaths and injuries in car accidents along the major highways in snow areas. I don't even think about that because I grew up in Ontario, Canada, where snow is always there. And but you also mentioned the wildlife. That's a fascinating topic as well, which is certainly not my area of expertise, but I'm currently taking a sustainability certificate program with MIT, and it's really broadening my awareness, like you said, to not just speak to weather, but to our earth, and how important it is to protect all of our biodiversity, um, you know, areas, and of course animals, a big part of that. Um, it really is interesting to see, fish and spawning patterns and things like that in British Columbia changing, whales where they shouldn't be, or, all these different changes. And I don't think we even really take note because they're underwater and they're doing their thing and we're just living our life on our
yeah.
comfy, cozy. But there's a lot of things happening that are unnoticed, that are going unnoticed. With that new dire wolf situation being brought back from extinction, like I think it's really cool scientifically, but I'm vehemently against the idea of this sort of thing, truly, because I think we have so many problems to fix as it is. I don't think we need to bring more, um, you know, more problems, more animals that we maybe can't house appropriately. And think about how many changes there's been to our Earth since that dire wolf would have inhabited the Earth. So,
Yeah, agreed, agreed.
you know,
So let's talk about the aftermath and the cost of the aftermath of these extreme weather events.
mhm.
Material, physical, mental. We don't forcefully think so much about it, and it's probably not covered as much in the news as when the big storm is occurring, and obviously it's a big spectacle, and well, there is all the destruction that goes with it. So, open question again, what would you say is the cost of the damage and losses of extreme weather events? And do we put a cost enough on it? Because people do understand dollars, they do understand losing their home. Sometimes people they love, which is
Yes.
quite dramatic, but it
Yes.
happens. So, do you think we are aware enough that we could lose everything from one day to another? Um, and yeah, the cost of the mental health, I think you referred to it a little bit earlier, but we don't think of this. But I can only imagine, because that's not something I've experienced myself, but as you said, when you have extreme weather events repeating on a very regular basis, or happening all of a sudden, there is a mental toll as well.
Oh, very much. And I actually did a story about 2 or 3 years ago after that heat dome that we had here in BC. So a heat dome is a ridge of high pressure, lots of sunshine, and heat is just sitting over an area like a dome. You imagine like a dome. It's like a big bubble, and it's trapped, and it just gets hotter and hotter and hotter. And we broke all-time Canadian heat records during that event. We went on to have an epic fire season in British Columbia that particular year. A whole town called Lytton, BC, this is crazy, actually broke the all-time Canadian heat record, not one, not two, but 3 days in a row in this heat event. The very next day, a train went by and sparked a wildfire that burned down the entire town within a day. So that was incredible. That was such an awful story. That happened, I think it was in June. And then that following fall in British Columbia, we had what we call an atmospheric river event, which is basically a flooding, a surge of moisture coming over the Pacific Ocean into Vancouver. Okay, so into the west coast of Canada. We got so much rain. I think it was 230 millimeters of rain or something over this short period of time. It compromised all of our highway infrastructure in Canada. This has never happened. We had chunks of our highway being washed away in the mountains. It cut off all trade and transit east to west in Canada. It was in 2021. It was a massive story. Well, that particular year, people here in British Columbia were definitely feeling climate anxiety because we knew that these were linked to climate change. And I did a story on that particular year because those were three events, like all-time Canadian heat record 3 days in a row. You know, fire season that year, which was at the time record setting. And then a record setting rain event all in one calendar year.
Right.
People are thinking, this is not normal. What gives? So climate anxiety is a very real feeling for people. And I think that we're seeing more and more. I mean, I don't have biological children. I didn't make a choice to not have biological children because of climate, but many are. You know,
Yeah,
many
true.
women and men, as or whatever, you know, your relationship is, that's irrelevant. You're choosing to not bring children into this world because of what they're coming into. And that's got to be a big shift. I don't think we were doing that 50 years ago, you know, actually making those choices based on climate change. So yeah, mental health impacts, you know, much like the pandemic had such an impact on many people. Weather can have that same kind of trauma. People losing everything in a fire, people losing everything in a hurricane. These are things that take a long time, I'm sure, not only just to rebuild, but to get over that fear that something like that can happen again.
Yeah, as you were talking, I was thinking of Africa. We haven't cited them very much, but they are having droughts as well. And when you
Yeah,
already don't have very much
right.
to live, and you have droughts after droughts, it can be so dramatic, and then you have no choice basically. And I really loved what you said about, you know, where people are, it's their home. It's so true. And when it wasn't your choice to move somewhere else, but you're obliged to, it's a completely different life experience, isn't it?
Absolutely. And those same people that you're referring to in many parts of the world, but certainly, you know, the global south that are feeling these impacts because of other people's mistakes. And that's what's heartbreaking, you know, and yet
Yeah.
greed and, you know, money just continues to keep turning this engine. And we really need to pause and remember every choice that all of us make are impacting that person where they have to leave their home that they don't want to leave. And it's heartbreaking.
Absolutely. So, quoting you, Jaclyn, you said that at the end of the day, storms don't care about politics. So, what are the craziest claims you've seen to justify the changes in weather or create a division that we probably need to be aware of?
I remember being in the hurricane zone this fall and actually hearing and seeing it on social media, which of course take it for with a grain of salt because lots of noise on social media these days. But people were actually blaming uh, the Democratic Party in the United States for engineering these storms to to make sure that they make landfall in an area where the
Oh my God.
Republican people live, and just crazy stuff like this, like just absolutely unbelievable. Like, who is buying into this stuff is
I
really
didn't know someone
alarming,
could do this.
you know? Like, it's just crazy. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, when a storm is barreling at the coast, toward the coast in the United States, it really does not matter what political party you belong to or what you support, because at the end of the day, you're going to be taking a bucket and bailing out your neighbor's basement if there is one, or you know what I'm saying? You're going to be cleaning up debris. You're going to be bringing over some food and water. It doesn't matter. And it's so frustrating because we need to be coming together at a time like this instead of working against each other. And it's happening a lot in my country too, where there's this divisiveness, very similar to the United States. Not quite as bad, but I don't like seeing it. This is not how I remember Canada being when I was growing up. It was, and that's not going to help us. That's only going to hurt us
Mhm.
when when finding solutions to climate change. There's something I heard recently, like how we were talking about words, and it's like, oh, climate change, a yucky word. It becomes so politically divisive. So let's change the word. Let's be creative about it. It's like there's going to be a time, and I think it's already happening, where I've heard this from experts in the field, where renewables are so economically enticing and viable that we just have to rename that industry so it doesn't politically divide people. Do you know what I mean? So that people are investing in renewables and decarbonization without having to have the political sticker on it. If
Yeah,
there's a way
yeah,
that we
yeah.
can all get on the same page by maybe changing some names, I think at the end of the day, money is money and greed is greed. So if money is over on the renewable side, then that greed's probably going to end up over there as well. And that maybe is a good thing,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
you know?
exactly. Yeah. And we were talking quite a lot about global north, global south, but sometimes I really feel for the global south and the smaller countries of the global south because they do make big, gigantic efforts to take part to the big international meetings, and then they are against the big fossil fuel lobbies,
Yep.
and yeah, they have a lot of merit, I must say. So I just want to actually finish on that topic by going back to Hurricane Milton, because ironically, the oil company BP abandoned its green commitments and specifically their oil output reduction target in October 2024 amidst the Atlantic hurricane season and the news of Hurricane Milton. So do you think the universe was trying to tell us something? It seems unbelievable that it's all happened at the same time.
It's kind of crazy. Yes, I remember that at that time. And I feel like also with President Trump in power and all of the regression that we've seen over the last months, that it's it's a very tough space to be in right now in the climate change sustainability space. It's going to be a very tough next 4 years, but we need people like us more and more to do our best. We are needed more and more to have a voice. And yeah, I mean, it was ironic that timing happened at that time, but there's going to be several more over the next 4 years. And I really don't have any words to say other. It's a shame. It's sad that 50% of the country voted somebody in that is so anti-climate change, anti-humanity in so many ways. I mean, it's just bad news. So the rest of us have to pull together and make our voices loud and known, and yeah, try and hope for a better return of people that will re-sign the Paris Accord, etc., in 4 years' time. Yeah,
Absolutely, yeah.
it's embarrassing as a Westerner. I mean, you live in France. I mean, my gosh, all of Europe has been impacted by this as of late right now. But the Canada, like the last 3 months, hearing Donald Trump talk about making Canada the 51st state, a lot of people kept thinking that it was just a joke, it was just laughable. It impacted us as Canadians big time. We really didn't like that. And we have united as a country more so because of that. And that's a good thing that we're actually now really all on the same page, maybe more than we have been the last couple of years. Um,
Yeah, and I
Canadians are,
liked to see this. I really liked
yeah,
to see this. I think we've seen some nice reactions to what was happening. Uh, There has been the Canadian story, there has been Greenland, because Greenland
Yes.
is closer to us, to our hearts in Europe, perhaps not so
Yes.
geographically, but it was the same story as well. And yeah, there are weird things happening in the world right now.
I know. We need a whole other podcast for that. A whole other episode.
So, what is your point of view, Jaclyn, about people in general? Do you think that people have started to realize how climate change is impacting them, or can impact them today or tomorrow? Or are we still very much living in a business as usual world, the status quo, where climate change is still either denied or ignored? What's your take on this?
I think we have actually made a big step in the right direction. I think that we're seeing changes globally. When I speak of the Western world and I speak of North America, there's been some setbacks, with the recent administration in the United States, obviously, and all the slashes to climate change and weather um, jobs. But when I look at the rest of the world and a lot of what I'm learning in my coursework with MIT right now, there's a lot of advancements around decarbonization and electrification and all kinds of great initiatives. So I think that people are getting the message that extreme weather, yes, is caused by climate change, many of which are, and we need to do XYZ to make our world better. And I think that 10 years ago, we didn't think like that, even 5 years ago. So that's encouraging. When you start to hear about countries like Norway, who have been just doing amazing things, Costa Rica has done some amazing things, even China has done some amazing things with solar and wind, as I understand. We're going to miss the boat here in the Western world if we are so tied to oil and gas and our combustible engines. We need to be on board with this more global approach. So, yes, my answer is I think there has been a shift, and that's really encouraging. And I don't think it's not going to happen as quickly as we'd like. And those severe weather events are not going to go away anytime soon. That's going to take hundreds of years to you know, get back to maybe more of a stable climate. Um, but I think people are now listening, and I really do see that. And I wish I could say it more about North America. I wish that I
Yeah.
felt that more where my home is. Um, I can be hopeful.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I know you interviewed Christiana Figueres, who was the executive secretary of the UN Framework Convention for Climate Change and has been instrumental in the 2015 Paris Agreement. And it was widely recognized as a historic achievement at the time because it felt as such a big milestone. And it was 10 years ago, and I think over the span of the past 10 years, I think you're totally right. We've seen so many changes happening. I think we need to remember that we are part of nature, and perhaps except when it's a storm, intensifying quickly, things don't happen so quickly. So we also need to go through the transition that's needed, but that's also why it's important to keep a good pace and make sure that it's actually happening. So I also wanted to ask you, what do you think is missing today so that people understand that if we don't take more action to change systems, we are increasing the risks to dramatic events like you were describing earlier. What do you think is missing to change the status quo and create more systemic change?
Well, coming from the communications world as a media person and as a performer, I mean, I think what we can always do better, I don't know if it's missing, but what we can always do better is communicate. I think that if it's social media, a TikTok video, a news report, a piece of art, having a coffee with a friend, if we're having these conversations around the world, only good can come from that. So I think it's about peppering it in to our lives in any way we can. And it's about little tiny small changes that we can all make, whether it's climate change or sustainability efforts. My husband and I have been challenging ourselves because I'm in the sustainability coursework for the next year. And it really starts to make you look at everything you do, what you consume, and all that. And none of us are perfect. And trust me, I can be one of the most, like, I love home decor. So my husband jokes that I have a pillow addiction because I'm always changing up pillows. Well, obviously, from a sustainability standpoint, that's not wise, right? Do I really need new pillows? Do I really need this or that? So when you really stop and start to look at your habits and you start to do better, imagine if that can just expand by having conversations with everyone you know, and then they have conversations, and all those little pieces add up to something really great. So I think communication is a big tool, and we have the ability now with so many platforms like what we're doing right now, podcasts, to do that. And so I think that the younger generation is educated in a way that maybe I'm Gen X, was not educated about these things. We didn't know that then. The science wasn't there. My parents certainly didn't. So as each generation comes on board here, they have an opportunity to learn and absorb a lot of this, not just the bad, but the good and the changes. And it's infectious, just like a smile is infectious, right? Doing good and doing good for our planet is infectious. It's a good thing. So, and Christiana Fietas, I should give a shout out because she literally, I would say, changed my life, changed my perspective. I've only gotten to meet her a few times, and it was through a friend, and I ended up at this really cool event. She is a very spiritual person. She is a Buddhist, and I've kind of entered a little bit of the Buddhism world and meditation, and the whole concept of how everything is interconnected, right? Climate is interconnected with sustainability, and that's why we have these COPs, these biodiversity COPs, and the climate COPs, and everything is so interlinked. So, I want to thank her for that because it really changed my whole appreciation for our earth that we call home. There was a Buddhist monk named Thich Nhat Hanh who she follows his teachings, and I've sort of, I don't want to sound like a bandwagon jumper because I've just kind of delved into this a little, but he said the way that we will solve climate change is if every one of us can fall in love with Mother Earth. And that is a beautiful thing because it's true. We need to fall in love with Earth, not just exist, not just do our thing, our jobs, but fall in love, find the beauty all around us. I'm lucky I live in a beautiful place in Canada that I get out in nature as much as I can and try and adhere to that.
Yeah, we need to remember this for sure. I just love we are finishing on this note because, I do think that at the moment there are a lot of people who've been doing great things these past years to create change, but losing hope because when you see some setbacks, like,
Right.
yes, what's happening at the moment in North America is unfun and it has a lot of consequences. But we need to forget a bit the headlines as well and understand that steady work
Yes.
spreads. Like you were saying with a smile spreads, that's absolutely true. And then there are more and more and more people doing great things, small and big. And it will continue, and we must not forget about that. And because you were talking about spirituality, I'm actually following like a spiritual leader at the moment, and I've actually heard the same thing from several. Recently, we were saying there is a rise of consciousness on Earth at the moment. So there is nothing to worry about in that respect. And yes, sometimes you're going to see a big world leader all of a sudden. It seems to be a lot of craziness, but it's one person with some following. But it's not everybody on the planet, and there are lots of great communities on the planet. We must not forget about that.
Celebrate the wins, right?
Yeah,
It's very
yeah,
easy to focus, and I don't mean to profess to be an expert, but someone like Christiana is. But what I've learned by meeting a lot of these people in this field is like, you can do your part, and yes, there's always going to be negativity. There's always going to be naysayers. It's always going to be a battle, but do celebrate the wins, and see how far we really have come in the last 5, 10, 20 years. It can only get better from here.
Yeah. And we all inspire each other. You've inspired me today. I hope you will inspire a lot of people from the audience. And yes, it is spreading, absolutely. So, Jaclyn, this podcast is called Shades of Life, with the idea that we each hold the power to paint life with our own colors, to leave a meaningful imprint on the planet. So I always end the podcast with the same question for the guest and for you today. If you were a color, what would it be and why? And it can be anything you want and for any reason you want.
I thought about this because I saw this question and I thought, okay, maybe blue, but I'm not really a blue kind of girl. So I thought blue because of oceans and the earth, and I always envisioned the earth as a blue planet for, obviously we all do. But I have to go with green because I guess I'm having more an appreciation of the biodiversity factor in climate change and sustainability. And living in British Columbia, I see mountains of green trees and beauty around me. Green signifies life, plants and rebirth and spring. Right now, all the blooms, leaves are coming out on the trees, which is my favorite time of year here in Canada. So, and also I like wearing the color green. So I would go with the color green.
Very nice. So we will take green for today. Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
thank you for all your insights. It was absolutely fascinating to hear from you on extreme weather events. I think we've learned a lot today. I was so happy to welcome you today. I wish you the very best, and I can't say I wish you a lot of extreme weather events this year. It's a bit paradoxal, isn't it?
Yeah, I know. No
I
one
will
wishes
certainly,
weather.
yeah, I will certainly follow your adventures, and I will put some link in the show notes so that people can discover more of your work because it's fascinating.
Thank you so much, Ingrid. It was so nice being with you here and getting to know you.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for watching and listening today. And we will be back next week with a new guest.